So it's amazing what you can get done when you rule with an authoritarian iron fist. I am thinking back to the COVID lockdowns in China and how they had sort of a more successful time with that because of the fact that they have an authoritarian rule. And they're now going to try something that I don't feel like could work without an authoritarian rule, which is requiring AI labels on all AI-generated content. And it's kind of up in the air if that will even work under an authoritarian rule. Have you encountered this news, Perry? Is a story that came across the other day.
Yeah, I saw news of like some fairly far-reaching and broadly encompassing Chinese regulation about AI that was going through. Some of it looked pretty cool and progressive, and some of it looked pretty draconian. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's at its core, it's a good idea, right? Because we've talked about how it would be nice if we could reliably label all AI-generated content so that if that is necessary for determining the veracity of something or whatever, you have that mechanism. But also the practical implementation of that is pretty hard to fathom. But the Chinese Communist Party's National Internet Censor just announced that all AI-generated content will be required to have labels that are explicitly seen or heard by its audience and embedded in metadata, and it takes effect on September 1st, 2025. A lot of what I'm going to cover in this is directly from a great article on Tom's Hardware, which we'll link in the description and the show notes. I tried to read the text of the original law after translating it using Google Translate. It was a bit hard for me to parse, so that's why I'm leaning very heavily on this source. So the regulation takes effect September 1st, 2025, and it would compel all service providers, so all AI LLMs, any platform like that, to add explicit labels to generated and synthesized content, including all types of data: text, images, videos, audio, even virtual scenes, anything that is generated by AI. Aside from that, it also orders app stores to verify whether the apps that they host are following these regulations. Ooh. So, yeah, part of this whole thing is well, how do you enforce it, right? Whose responsibility is it? Yeah. They're also outlawing the malicious removal, tampering, forgery, or concealment of those labels. So obviously, you're prohibited from removing it, but you're also prohibited from adding that identifier to non-AI content to try and, claim that something that's real. That makes
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from a statement in the CAC translated through Bloomberg, quote, "The labeling law will help users identify disinformation and hold service suppliers responsible for labeling their content. This is to reduce the abuse of AI-generated content." But, again, what is the effectiveness of labeling regulations? How enforceable is it? Meta tried to roll this out last year with a Made with AI label on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. You remember that? But that failed right from the start. People were, the feature was labeling real photos as being AI generated and stuff like that. So yeah, I wanted to find if there was more information about technically how they're going to enforce this. What do these watermarks metadata look like? And it seemed either to not be included in the text of the law or just impossible for me to parse.
Yeah, I think they're probably leaving some of that to the different vendors. So every vendor is going to have to figure out how do you embed metadata? How do you surface the watermarks or the other things? Here in the U.S., there is there's a method for trying to ascribe provenance to something. And there's I forget the acronym for it, but there's a coalition of organizations that have come and they kind of add the standard label to things around it. And I'm assuming China will do something similar. The biggest problem with a lot of this is that when it comes to information or disinformation, even when that watermark is there and it's visible, we mentally start to filter those things out. We stop, anything that's a mental trigger is a thing that can become disarmed and forgotten about and mentally filtered out, especially when you have repetition of information, and especially when that repetition of information fuels a cognitive bias that you already have.
And it's like when we saw with those pictures of the flooding in the U.S. where people would even just say, well, it doesn't matter if it's not real. It conveys the idea I wanted to convey. So
exactly.
There'll be that, which will help mentally shortcut people caring about that label, like you said, the repetition of it. And it's tough though, because on the one hand, I can totally see why you would want this. I mean, in a way, I would like this
makes
too.
Sense. The social ramifications are going to be interesting to watch, right? Because then is there the issue of when, for whatever reason, that label is not on something and it's synthetically generated, do people, I guess what I'm getting at is, do you also create a false sense of security? with the fact that the labels are mandated. And then so something comes in not following that, and then everybody is just ready to believe it.
Right. Or even edge cases like we talk about in FAIK, where you know AI generate a picture, print it out, take a photo. That photo is no longer AI generated. Does that need the metadata, the watermark? How would you automatically search for that kind of thing? So like there's just all sorts of implementation issues, but they are moving ahead. So
they're moving ahead. And I think that the law itself has some interesting nuance that we here in the U.S. could probably pay attention to, and there might even be some aspects of it that we want to bring on board at some point. I do also think that, like I said, that they're going to be an interesting test bed for that, because they are running forward with it, and they're running forward with it faster than we would get something like that out in regulation, especially when you look at like what J.D. Vance said at the Paris AI Summit, when you're saying we're kind of throwing AI safety to the side right now, and we're focused on full innovation. And I think that dichotomy between where China is going with it and where we are going with it will be something that we can study as an interested third party. So I'm looking at one other summary of this. There's some things related to this, like when presenting a virtual scene, a prominent reminder logo should be added to an appropriate location on the starting screen, and a prominent reminder logo should be added at an appropriate location during the continuous service of the virtual scene. And I'm guessing that's interesting because of the mix of virtual or AI generated and real production that may start to happen as you start stitch scenes together.
Yeah, that was also, virtual scenes being sort of specifically carved out, I thought was interesting. I wasn't really sure what that meant, but so it would seem that is pertaining to like embedded things that were made with AI embedded in other scenes that are like for VFX or something like that.
Yeah, I'm guessing so. And I'm sure that, movies and TV shows and all that have a past. They're primarily looking at like social media spread and things like that. But it's going to be weird to see where it works, and it's going to be really interesting to see where it breaks. Yeah,
and the writers of the Tom's Hardware article said that they didn't see any prescribed punishments for violators laid out in the law either, but there's always just sort of the vague threat of action from the Chinese government. So like we don't even know how they would respond to violations of what scale, by who.
What does this do to all the Chinese models right now that are better than U.S. models at producing disinformation? I'm assuming that the versions that we end up with here in the U.S. are going to be stripped of a lot of those watermarks and things like that, because China is protecting the way that information can be used against them and their government. They're not necessarily looking out for the rest of the world with that. So I'm guessing that DeepSeek is not all of a sudden going to have LLM-based watermarks in it. The Minimax and Kling and all that are not going to have prominent logos and watermarks within those, because it is in China's interest that those systems be weaponizable for the rest of the world. But by the rest of the world.
What's also interesting about that is, despite the, I think they call it the Great Firewall, how they have a fairly censored internet in China, there's still a lot of crossover with the worldwide internet. And like, are they just going to block every individual little AI provider out? Like, how do you even prevent models that don't?
And they're trying to do that through the distribution networks, right? That's why they're saying every app store has to be the one that owns the burden of vetting those systems.
But what
do they do with GitHub?
Yeah, things like that. So all of that remains to be seen, but the date that it supposedly goes into effect is September 1st. So it remains to be seen in the pretty near future, I suppose.
Yeah.
If another update like this crosses my awareness, we'll be sure to bring it up on the show. But it'll be interesting. AI labels, good idea. Implementation, question mark is kind of where
Harder.
I'm at. Yeah.
Exactly.
Coming up next, we're going to talk about how to change an LLM's opinion of you or someone you love for profit, for your own personal gratification, for anything like that. We'll be right back. Stick around.